So I want to make a joke about Sting here, but the movie's just too good. This is rapid review of Dune. Score up front, then analysis on the back. What did I think of Dune? Well, this was an absolute masterpiece. I have been thinking about this movie ever since I saw it yesterday. In fact, I'm not in my normal reviewing location. That's usually in my theater, but people are watching Dune, again, in my theater right now, and I just wanted to get this review done. So the main pro of this one is, I think this is a masterwork. It is deeply stylized and beautiful. In an odd way, because this is Dune we're talking about. Desert planet, everything is old, everything is broken, everything is musty, and yet there's this sense of scale and uncanniness to all of the visual design in such a way as to isolate the figures even when they're inside buildings. If you watch this movie, watch just about how the use of negative space and daunting architecture is used to make the characters feel small, because this is a story about a planet and an empire as much as it is about people. This movie's probably biggest con is how hugely respectful it is to the source material. I have not seen an adaptation this strong and this respectful, probably since Arrival, done by the same director, which has the same sense of taking science fiction seriously that, I haven't seen in a long, long time. This is as respectful as the Lord of the Rings films, and in many ways more faithful to the source material. Lord of the Rings films are amazing movies. That's not a knock against them, but that is the choice that Denis made when he made this film, and it just really is to the film's credit. It is the best adaptation of Dune by a long shot. I'll talk about the 1980s one in my analysis. Last big pro is, I am shocked, but this movie did not get Hollywoodized. What do I mean by that? Well, a lot of the blockbusters right now are not atmospheric mood pieces. A lot of the science fiction blockbusters are driven by the Marvel and DC format, which are very frenetic. And yes, they'll have some good visual design, but they'll also include a lot of what you might call jokey jokes, right? The mood-changing Hulk punches Thor moments. Again, don't get me wrong. I love those in the Marvel films. Many Marvel films are in my, top 10 movies I've seen of the year that they were released, right? I absolutely love Endgame and Infinity War. But Dune, that's not appropriate for. I was expecting some producer, some Hollywood exec to ruin this movie, and they didn't. It is just masterful. So what are the cons? So these are going to be reasons you might not want to see the movie or enjoy it. I don't think they're actually flaws in the film. The main one being it didn't get Hollywoodized. What does that mean for this movie? It means that Dune as a piece of fiction is very self-important and very serious. I love that about it. It, like Lord of the Rings, takes itself just very seriously. And this movie does the same thing. That means you're not gonna get a lot of jokes. You're not gonna get a lot of moments of levity. This film treats the source material like Frank Herbert would have wanted. And in this case, that means it is kind of slow for an action film. It is a mood piece about the setting and the uncanny nature of this world, and it is less about the action, even though the action is fantastic. Another potential con, this book has been borrowed from a ton, and so you're going to go see this if you're unfamiliar and be like, wow, there is a mystical pseudo-religious order who can use their voices and give orders to people and they will obey. That's very Force-like. Aside from the fact that the book predates Star Wars by over a decade. In the same way, you might have seen a movie about a person from one world, kind of westernized world, thrown into a more native society and learning to become part of them, much like Avatar, much like Dances with Wolves. Once again, this predates this and is kind of the progenitor of that kind of archetype. It is handled very well in the film. I don't think you're gonna go into it and be like, wow, this is a Ferngully ripoff. But there are a lot of things in this movie. If you've read The Wheel of Time, you're gonna be like, wow, there's a lot of things from The Wheel of Time in this movie. Well, it's the other way around. Another con is some people are noting half a movie. It is half of the book. The book Dune splits right in the middle with a kind of there's a natural breaking point, much like the end of the first Lord of the Rings film was a natural breaking point in that story, but it is half of a story, and it is most of the setup. That's okay, because that's what Dune is. Dune is about the setup, but be forewarned, this is a movie about the setting, and even though I think the info dumps are handled well, this is not a movie that is conforming to a standard 3-act format. Those who love the book will notice some minor cuts of nuance. I'll talk about those later. And finally, because this movie is taken so seriously, it's kind of like it is the physical manifestation of an emotionally laden whisper, right? There's a lot of emotion and a lot of very powerful musical cues and things like this in this film, and I can see someone just not liking that aesthetic. But overall, I am giving this movie a 10 out of 10. This is what perfect movies look like for me. All right, time for analysis. So, if you can't tell, I loved this movie. Dune is one of my favorite books of all time. It's probably the book I've read the most that wasn't written by me or Robert Jordan. It is also kind of a fever dream of a book. It's written in Omniscient, which is really difficult to adapt. I love, for various reasons, despite it being kind of bad, the Lynch's version done in the early 80s. He tries to capture some of this feverish nature of the prose by using voiceovers. That never worked. It's pretty awful in that movie, despite being really an interesting choice. This movie does a much better job of that by leaning into Paul's visions, showing that they're metaphorical, and then showing them come to pass in an unexpected way. This, again, reminded me of Arrival, which is playing with dreams and destiny in a different way. I won't spoil that. Very different sort of take on it, but the same director again. And in this film, I thought that was beautiful. I loved the moment where Paul realized he had to let Paul die so Muad'Dib could live. That all of those visions were pointing toward this moment. It was a really great emotional climax for me, handled extremely delicately in a way I just did not expect the film to be able to pull off. It was just really, really marvelous. This director, Denis, is amazing. Everything I've seen by him is incredible. This is a modern version of 2001, or it's defies comparison like that. It is a modern version of 2001 in that it is probably the best and most faithful science fiction adaptation we're going to get in this decade, would be my guess. Just really, really great. Some of that nuance I talked about. So I found it very interesting that much like the Lord of the Rings adaptations, the characters have had their arcs, how should we say, expanded a little bit. Paul and Jessica are both just a little weaker in this than they are at the beginning of the book. Now, I always imagined that Jessica is this powerful stoic kind of Aes Sedai figure, but then I go back and read the book, I'm like, Jessica is deeply flawed in places and is not that, but she is a little stronger. Giving the fear is the mind killer quote to her was a really interesting choice. I liked how it played out. I loved the emotion she showed in the Gom Jabbar scene. Did I even say that right? I apologize to you, true Dune fans. I am bad with pronouncing some of these things. But loved her in that scene, even though this is a more emotional Jessica than I am used to. Likewise, Paul comes off at the beginning of this a little more green. Granted, he's green in the book in that he's never actually been into combat and things, but his training is such that in the book, you get a bit better sense that this is somebody ready to take on the world. And Denis pulls back on that. And I think it's very appropriate for the film, but it is something that I think that people might notice and talk about. Other changes from the book. So some of the political machinations by necessity have been removed. I joked about Sting not being in this movie, but of course, even his character is not in this movie. They've been combined, the two nephews. And I think that works really well. Dune already has a very large cast. but it is, a little like cutting the Scouring the Shire, right? Or Tom Bombadil. It is one of those things that, like, Dune has so much political nuance to what's happening that you can only get some of the skeleton of that in the movie. Though I do think that the details that they chose and picked really make the movie work. I had several people in my showing in my theater who had not read the book, and they loved the movie, and they felt like they got everything that the book was trying to do in the movie after I talked to them a little bit about it. Your mileage may vary, but as you can tell, I am very much a fan of this movie. I spent hours kind of shaking after watching it. It's like the movie had the voice, right? I have read Dune 6 or 8 times, right? I should not have been shaken by a movie. In fact, I generally don't love watching movies based on books that I know really well. This happened to me with Ender's Game, right? I'm like, well, it can't hold up to the book. I've read the book many times. Why would I see the movie? Yet I was really excited for this one because I had seen the Lynch version. I've seen the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries. It's not like, Dune is this pristine thing that's never been touched. And I wanted people to love Dune like I love Dune. And so being able to see it treated this well was really a treat for me. And beyond that, it has something that's indescribable. The film has the same sort of soul that Dune the book has, and that, I think, is what left me shaking. Really, really loved the visual design of this film. As I spoke about earlier, one of the great things that films can do that books can't, that I envy films for, is visual styling as motif. And a lot of the adaptations, if they do Caladan, I can't even remember how much of Caladan is done in the Lynch version. You don't have these giant halls, not on the Harkonnen planet or things like these giant architectural pieces, these open skies with little figures standing before them and things like that, in order to emphasize the idea that people are small in this universe despite pretending they are big. And the Fremen are the only ones that get that. They blend into the scenery, vanishing and becoming part of this large scope rather than standing individually and trying to draw attention futilely because they cannot draw attention from the scenery and landscape because they are just too minuscule. That theme as a visual motif in this film is brilliant. And stepping on top of that is the idea that a lot of the human creations are very unnatural. The way that the ships hang in the sky, the way that people float through the sky. Obviously, the Harkonnens and all of their people, they say Harkonnen in the film. I wonder if that's correct. I wonder if that's what Frank Herbert intended. Either way, they are obviously inhuman despite their humanity, right? And human as a phrase, as a word, is used in this film to great effect to emphasize that people are kind of inhuman. And obviously they are very alien feeling, and a lot of the color palette and things like that emphasizes that with them. But everyone, all the ships, everything looks wrong until you get to the still suits, which just fit the environment. It's like they're matching the rocks, and they're covered in the dust and things like this, and suddenly you put on a still suit, instead of being alien, you belong. Instead of floating on this weird bulb that comes down, you are part of the landscape. And it's just beautiful how he does that. You might look at it and say, wow, it's just a bland Dune brown color palette, and yet that's the genius to this film. I could go on and on about this. I am so envious of how you can do this in a movie. I can do things in books that films can't do, but this is one of the big ones that films can do, and I wish it were easier to do in a book. I don't know what more there is I can say. I thought the pacing was great. Every time I'm like, all right, now we get this scene, we got it, and it was done and handled really well. After the movie, I'm like, I can't even remember what we missed. And then after I thought about it, there's the dinner scene and some of these things that weren't in the film, and I was able to pick them out. But while I was there in the moment, there was nothing that I was waiting for to happen that didn't happen and was always treated really, really well. The acting was on point. I'm really impressed with the lead actor, Timothée Chalamet, the lead actor. I am really impressed that they managed to get Chani into the movie as much as they did, despite the fact that, she's not really in the first half of Dune that much. And that's comes down to using those visions as a way to evoke the same sort of dreamlike feel that's happening a lot in the book. Really, really good stuff. I'm really excited and hopeful that we'll get a second half of this movie, and I think they could actually film the rest of the series, which I did not think was ever going to be possible, but totally possible with this team. Either way, I love this movie. I hope that you guys do as well, and I will be back with another rapid review sometime in the future. Unfortunately, probably reviewing something that's a little less of a monument to the science fiction genre.